Hey, Mary, thanks. You got the stream going again.
Yep. We're all set.
People coming back. Hey, good to see everybody.
And we do have captioning now, so if anyone needs it, if your internet isn't great, you can always turn on captions also.
How do you do that, Mary?
You go down to the bottom of your screen to the little more ellipsis, and then just say show subtitle.
Thanks. Well, I'm very excited. We're about to introduce and hear from Deb Socia, but before we do that, I wanted to just pause for just a moment and see if anybody had anything they wanted to share back to the full group from your small group discussions about the conference so far. And I'll just pause a minute. Go ahead and speak up or raise your hand, anybody.
In our group, people just really love the discussions with the other attendees, and as well as the richness of the presentations throughout. So a lot of technical knowledge that people have received, and just greater awareness of the issues.
Thanks for that, Bill. Okay, well, no reason to further delay this morning's delight. It's really a pleasure. I'm thrilled to introduce to all of us the amazing and the one and only Deb Socia. Deb is my personal hero and nationally renowned digital national champion. Thanks for being here this morning, Deb. I got to be in a small group with her and was really tickled to hear that she'd joined for parts of the conference and has been with us for part of it as well. Although in our small group, we talked a little bit about how disaggregated and atomized this experience is. It's hard to roll it up and share it, but it was fun to hear from Deb in our small group that she'd been on some of the conference so far. Deb is the president and CEO of an outfit called the Enterprise Center, which is a nonprofit based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that aims to ensure that all residents have access to broadband and the skills to use it. So she's our people. Entrepreneurship, innovation, digital equity, smart city applications are just some of the areas of focus that the Enterprise Center works on in Chattanooga. Prior to her current role there, Deb was the executive director of a couple of other really righteous, awesome organizations, national organizations, including Next Century Cities. And before that, she also worked for the Tech Goes Home program in Boston. And before that, she spent 32 years as an administrator and educator. Deb's been the recipient of many, many national awards for her work, too many to mention, except I will name my favorite one on the list that I saw, the Motherboard Human of the Year Award. That must have felt fun to get a Human of the Year award, Deb. That's fantastic. So she's got no PowerPoint with us today. We were chatting ahead of time that she really likes to see people's faces and have that interaction that we're looking for from conferences. So if you're able, and if you feel comfortable, we'd like to encourage you to please keep your cameras on. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deb. Thanks again for being with us, Deb.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I do see some familiar faces too. I'll just say hi to Mark. I have to say that the Motherboard article was really funny because the title was, "She doesn't want your internet to suck." And it wasn't exactly the sort of thing you share with your children and grandchildren. It was kind of a funny title for it. It's true, but that's not how I would have said it. Anyway, I have to say, Bernadine, I have never watched South Park before in my life, but watching that little clip cracked me up. It is how we feel when we can't get online, right? You get really anxious about it. So I listened to several of the presenters, as you mentioned. It was really fun for me to hear from Roberto Gallardo. I've worked with him on a bunch of different things over the years, and he's always impressive. Rock County was one of my favorite parts, as I mentioned in the breakout. I have appreciated the opportunity to join. But my conversation with you today is going to be more about stories and the projects and recommendations based on the years I've been working in this space. And of course, more recently, we've seen a lot more interest and attention being paid to the importance of ensuring everybody can get online. But it hasn't really yet led to the kind of change we need, right? So the issues that we're looking at today are the same issues we looked at last year. The difference is that we have gotten a little more attention because of the pandemic, right? That has certainly elevated the urgency. I feel sort of like that singer who says, yeah, overnight sensation, I've been working at it for 20 years. You know, we're finally getting some attention, but boy, we sure have been working on it for a very, very long time. We've seen the pictures of students sitting in parking lots at local fast food restaurants. There was one of 2 little children at Taco Bell. And that seemed to surprise some folks. But those of us who have been working in this space, we weren't surprised. It's been a truth that we've been trying to share for a lot of years. So I work here in Chattanooga, and Chattanooga's mayor tells the story of a mom who told him that she would go from fast food restaurant to fast food restaurant to fast food restaurant, a different one every night, so that her kids could get their homework done. She didn't want anybody to know that's what she was doing, so she didn't go to the same place every night. And it really bothers me that a family has to go to that level of effort in order to have a resource that's essential for learning. You know, I started my career as a math and science teacher, and back then, if you were poor, you still had equitable resources available to you. Every student had a textbook. Every student who had to do research had to go to the library. And maybe some of you remember the Reader's Guide to Periodicals and the bookmobiles and the card catalogs. Well, we all had access to the same information. And it's possible that more affluent children had more notebooks or one of those cool 4-click pens. Remember, they were red and blue, right? And a dedicated place to learn at home. But the essential resources for learning were identical for all children. But that's no longer true. So some students have laptops, smartphones, graphing calculators, others don't. And yet we score their work and judge them as if they had the exact same resources. So can you imagine 2 10th graders, each with an identical research project? One has hardware and home access, the other doesn't. And now make it worse because all the libraries were closed here, at least until very recently, because that is what's going on for our students. And it really bothers me that these 2 students, once they produce an outcome, will be judged on the very same criteria. So that's really why I'm so passionate about ensuring home access is available to everybody and is considered an essential learning tool. It's just wrong to expect that when the inputs are different, the outputs will be the same. So of course, you all already know this. Learners, workers, creators, doers, we know everybody has to have access to this resource. And the pandemic has just shown a brighter spotlight on how that lack of access impacts our community's capacity to be resilient. And that's why I've really cared about working on this for so long. About 15 years ago, I was still a principal in Boston. Maybe it was a little longer ago, actually. And I helped create the current version of Tech Goes Home, which is a program that helps to improve quality of life through access to broadband, devices, and digital skills training. And the goal is to share ways that people can live, learn, earn, work, and play successfully online. Eventually, I did leave the principalship to run Tech Goes Home across the entire city of Boston. And during that time, I actually brought Tech Goes Home to Chattanooga as well as some other communities around the country. But between Boston and here, I was the founding leader of another nonprofit called Next Century Cities. So what happened was, as I was working on Tech Goes Home in Boston, I heard from people all over the country saying, it's not just that we can't afford to pay for it. We don't have it, right? We can't get anything but dial-up or satellite. And that just was irritating to me. And so I wanted to help find some solutions, not just for the rural areas, but the redlined neighborhoods in some of our cities. And the issue of cost was and is a #1 issue in our efforts to ensure digital equity. There are communities where some of the large ISPs promised to come in and build to the entire community, which happened in Boston. And then they only built out in the wealthy areas. What was even worse for me was that they had DSL in part of the city and fiber in a part of the city, and they charged the same for both products. So if you lived here, you only had DSL as an option and you paid the same price as if you were in the affluent parts of the city. That's just wrong. So while I was at Next Century Cities, I worked with over 200 mayors, helping them create local policies like Dig Once, Climb Once, helping to support municipal broadband builds, public-private partnerships, open access networks, and incremental plans. So kind of all over the country, we looked at projects and plans. And that's where I met Mark, when Mark was working on that project. So I worked to assist city leaders to prevent state legislation that would preempt or create barriers to local control and local decision-making. And I worked to advocate for overturning those laws where they were already in place. We have one of those laws here in Tennessee, and it does get in the way for us solving problems. So if you check the Next Century Cities site, you'll find some great resources, including a primer. I'm going to copy and paste this into the chat for you. Including a primer on pole attachments. And this is a toolkit on becoming broadband ready. There are quite a few sample policies and case studies in there that you might find helpful. In fact, there's some information in there about RS Fiber. So you might find that interesting. So during the years I was in Washington, DC, running Next Century Cities, I often worked with Mayor Andy Burke here in Chattanooga. He's actually incredibly dedicated to solving the digital access dilemma. So about a year and a half ago, he recruited me to come here to Chattanooga to work as president of the Enterprise Center. So it's interesting because the Enterprise Center actually houses Tech Goes Home as one of their programs. So here I am back again. It's like being home. And I'm really enjoying it very much. I think for me, the best part of this, as I'm coming to the end of my career, is being able to work on the local level again and to feel like I am part of a group of people who are actually getting something done. At the local level, you see impact in a way that you can't when you work at the national level. So this new gig at the Enterprise Center, we partnered with the city of Chattanooga, we partnered with Hamilton County, and our mission is really to unite people. How do we bring people together? How do we focus on equity? How do we energize and lift up our innovation district? We actually facilitate and participate in the Smart Community Collaborative. It's a lot of varied issues that we work on, but they're all related to technology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Tech Goes Home because it's really an interesting model for managing digital training. So it's elegant in its simplicity and its flexibility and its replicability. We used a train the trainer model, which means neighborhood anchor institutions, librarians, school teachers, people in nonprofits, faith-based leaders could run the program in their location. And the classes, therefore, are nearer to the people that we hope to serve. And the best part about it is we could leverage the trust that existing neighborhood asset already had in the neighborhood, right? Who do you know in your neighborhood? You maybe know your librarian, you maybe know your faith-based leader. Knowing that you can trust them means you're more likely to engage. The other reason that was helpful is because when the program was done after the 15 hours of training, they knew the person that did their training. And if they had a question, they knew where they were, right? It created that really nice, comfortable assistance project for them. So the school program is a little bit different than our community program because when a child participates in that, they bring a parent or guardian with them. So it's both together and they're taught by a teacher in their school. And it builds not only digital skills, but creates a positive way for parents to engage with their children and their children's school. And there's very clear data about student achievement that is very related to parent engagement in their school. So this is a really positive thing all around. It's a little bit more expensive to run the school model only because the teachers teach the course outside of school time, which means we need to pay them a stipend. But we created this huge wide array of training modules and we called it the buffet. We told the trainers to assess the needs of the people in their room and pick the training modules that made the most sense. So if you're the parent of a public school child, you'll want to know the district's learning management system, right? So you can check their grades. If you're unemployed, you might want to do a job search or a resume creation. Or maybe the priority for a class of seniors is to learn how to shop online or Skype with your grandchildren, right? So what we didn't want to do was tie people to a very specific curricula. Rather than that, we tell trainers to pick the set of learning modules that make sense for the people in front of them. So in addition to those programs, we actually run a lot of programs for folks who are disabled. So people who are visually impaired and blind, who are deaf, who are nonverbal, who have other forms of disabilities. And we run a very special course here now for folks who are working from home to provide them with tools that'll help with their efficiency. That's really been a real challenge for a lot of folks who have now shifted to working from home. We also have some really unique classes that we've run for folks who are creatives, so artists and musicians, and other people who run a smaller micro business so that they can do a better job of organizing, marketing, and selling online, because that's the only way you're going to be resilient in a circumstance like today. We don't want to lose those beautiful cultural icons in our community because we couldn't keep them afloat during the pandemic. So part of Tech Goes Home, every participant gets a Chromebook or a tablet, depending on the program. It's a $50 copay that the recipient pays. We've never found that to be a burden for our participants. In fact, our homeless participants have been able to come up with the $50. If they couldn't, we'd find a solution, but it hasn't been a problem. So along with that computer, the brand new computer, we provide a year of tech support from a local vendor. And that local vendor also helps with bulk ordering, storage, delivery, and collecting the co-payment. So one of the number one questions I get is why we don't use refurbished computers. So there are quite a few reasons. One, we don't have to have storage, right? I wouldn't want to have to rent storage space for computers. We don't have a truck. We're not dealing with a lot of tech issues. When I originally was giving parents at my school refurbished computers, I was getting phone calls all the time because this broke, the key fell off. You know, it became a real dilemma for me. And I think it's really respectful to hand somebody something new. And that has been really powerful. Of course, right now we can't bulk order Chromebooks, which some of you may know, the supply chain has been a real problem. In March, when we recognized this was coming, we actually bulk ordered a huge, we put in a huge bulk order. Unfortunately, after several delays, we finally got our money back in September because they couldn't get the devices. So right now, what we're doing, we have one staff member who spends most of his day every day on Amazon, Walmart, Target, wherever he can go. He's getting 5 at a time, 7 at a time, 8 at a time. But we are running 27 classes right now. So there are 10 to 15 people in each class. So we have got to get those computers in place. So the other challenge created by the pandemic, of course, was to take our course online. So creating the content, Zoom licenses, delivering devices and 4G hotspots, those weren't the hard part. The hard part is helping somebody who doesn't have a lot of digital skills get online so they can learn digital skills, right? So if you don't have any digital skills, how do you get online, right? So we've had to come up with all kinds of tutorials and phone calls and one-on-one supports with social distancing and masks. So it's been a challenge. But our trainers have been creative and found great ways to make this work. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to drop something in the chat. This is what we're calling TGH Shorts, Tech Goes Home Shorts. This is a project we put together this summer for our parents that will allow them to learn all the learning management tools, all of the software their children are using in little teeny short videos. Just trying to find ways to make that a little easier. One other thing that's happening in Chattanooga right now is we have something called virtual learning centers. I thought this was a brilliant idea. There are almost 60 churches signed up to provide a virtual learning center for children. And the centers can provide structure, small group support, and a quiet learning space to students who'd otherwise be learning from home. The threat of exposure to COVID-19 is obviously significantly lessened because the group size is so much smaller. The volunteers who support the centers don't have to be teachers because their role isn't to be the teacher, but to help facilitate teaching because the teachers are teaching them off-site. So almost all the children in our county have a device, but our organization did get a grant to provide all of those spaces that need them with 4G hotspots, some devices, and headphones for the kids. So, so far I've described the easier part of the work, the participant training and the devices. The hardest part of this work has been and continues to be finding affordable, unlimited home broadband access, which I am sure you all have experience managing. In Chattanooga, where we have a local utility, the electric power board we call EPB, they have fiber to everybody in their electric footprint. So that's fabulous, but state law prohibits them from giving that service to anybody for less than it cost them to provision it, which meant our low-cost plan here was $27 a month, and that is way too high for low-income families to manage. The low-wage earners here are earning in the range of $7.25, $7.50 an hour. $27 a month is way too high for them. So we had to get creative. We do have internet essentials here, and that has been really helpful, though those of you who have worked to try and connect people to that resource know it's not always easy and it doesn't always work because of the program conditions that are created by Comcast. And I have to say, I'm pleased Comcast is doing that, and it's come a whole long way since its beginning. 25.3 is a whole lot better than what they originally had, and I think they're doing it in good faith. But we still have way too many children unconnected here. Even with fiber in our whole community, we made NDIA's, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance's list of the worst connected cities every year. So you get a sense of what the dilemma is for us. It's financial. So we knew we had all these unconnected children. We knew we needed a short-term solution and a long-term solution because we had to do something fast. So for the short term, we called schools, churches, businesses. We asked everybody we could, will you please open your Wi-Fi for public use? And if they were willing to, we put all that data on a GIS map with the help of our local university. And then we worked with philanthropy locally and EPB to purchase and install an additional 125 hotspots in areas of high need. So basically, we looked at a variety of data sets, from the 211 calls to census data to areas where we knew we had a lot of school children. And you can bring the map up on your phone and put in your address, and it will tell you the nearest spot to get free Wi-Fi. So the goal was to make sure that the folks in the lower income neighborhoods would have a 5-minute or less walk to free public Wi-Fi. Because the Quick Connect hotspots have gigabit backhaul, it definitely helps a lot, right? It's a very robust service because we always have more than one person using them at a time. So some of the hotspots were near low-income housing, some were near our virtual learning centers to support that effort, and others are in neighborhoods. So I'm going to give you a link to that too. What has been interesting is how much data folks have used on those hotspots. It actually, as of September 30th, over 20 terabits of data had been used in those 125 hotspots. So you can tell how important that was to our community. So while this was happening, we also wanted a longer term solution. And so Mayor Burke and our superintendent, Dr. Johnson, and EPB COO, David Wade, they all got together with philanthropy and our organization and others to create what we call HCS Ed Connect. So the bottom line to that program is that every single child who is eligible for free or reduced lunch will be given home access. That home access is 100 megabits symmetrical at no cost to the family. So even those students whose families were already paying EPB for service, the $27 a month, they got it for free now too. If they owed money to EPB, they still got it. So this is going to support 30,000 children in 18,000 homes, and they have committed to at least 10 years, probably longer. So you can imagine we had to be creative because we couldn't charge less than the provisioning cost. So what we did was we raised funds for the upfront cost of the infrastructure. So the ONTs, so the optical network terminals, the enclosure, the routers, the cost of installation, and that cost was estimated at about 8.2 million. So far, we've raised 7.9 million of those dollars. The ongoing costs will be supported by EPB and the school district. They were able to save a lot of money because when EPB charges for this, they write one bill and they get one check. So that was part of the cost savings that we factored in. So far, we've got 5,000 connected, and we're hoping that in the next couple of months, we'll get all 17 or 18,000 done. The challenge here, the other challenge from the state law is that EPB can't go beyond their electric footprint. So we had to come up with a solution for a number of families that are in the county, but not in EPB's footprint. So, and they have their best access was DSL. So we needed to find a way to provide an option. We weren't going to get fiber, at least not yet. We're working on that too, but at least not yet. So what we did was we purchased 4G hotspots through Verizon. It's very expensive. A lot more, quite frankly, than using a Sprint network. But unfortunately, that area, Sprint just doesn't work there. So it created another dilemma for us. But so you know, there is an organization, I don't know if any of you have heard of Mobile Citizen, but I'm going to drop their link in too. Mobile Citizen, actually, if you're working with folks who can use a Sprint network, they have a hotspot that you can purchase along with a year's worth of unlimited data. And that cost $186 for the entire year. And so we've bought 200 of those and been able to use those as stopgap measures for some folks who are just unable to find it. And the thing I like about it is it's unlimited data, right? So it's not perfect, but it's unlimited. So the first year, 186, after that, it's $10 a month. And they do not directly bill the user. So for example, we paid for all of the whole year. And if anybody we've shared them with, mostly faith-based folks, to be honest, want to continue, we'd need them to give us $10 a month. And that's a bit of a pain. On the other hand, I know you have PCs for People in Minnesota. They are a group that works with Mobile Citizen, and they'll allow the individual to purchase through PCs for People that same exact product, but it's $15 a month, right? So, but that's still way better than what the alternatives are. A lot of those hotspots have really low data caps, and that's really a problem. When you think about what our children are doing every day in order to learn online, it's a real challenge. So we've done other work in our community in response to COVID-19, and I'll share a couple of those quick projects. At the start of the shutdown, our team got together and said, okay, who's going to be most impacted? Who can we help? And churches came out really pretty high. We have a lot of faith-based organizations here, and many of them are in the very low-income neighborhoods. A lot of them are Black and Latino churches, and they didn't have a lot of resources. And closing their doors meant they no longer could collect tithes. It meant they could no longer minister to their congregations. So we worked with them to connect the pastors to the resources and connect them to volunteers who could train them. We gave them tablets. We showed them how to FaceTime. We showed them how to collect donations online. And we gave them a 4G hotspot so they could have the access. And interestingly enough, several of the pastors have told me they increased the size of their congregation and that they've never had so many donations. And that's a beautiful side effect of what took very little effort to do. We did similar work with restaurants. You know, the small, tiny restaurants here are really important to us. And what's interesting about it is that they're really good at making food. They're really bad at technology. So I'm not trying to make that a blanket statement, but it's common. And so what happened was people wouldn't know if they could do pickup or if there was delivery or what had changed. because nobody was able to, they weren't able to fix their technology. And so we worked with local volunteers to put a banner on their sites that says, look at our Facebook page for daily updates, because they could all manage Facebook, right? So trying to figure a few of these things out has been really a challenge. We also helped a lot of health-based programs, health-related programs, by giving 4G hotspots and devices. One of the problems is, even if I, as a medical provider, if I were a medical provider, even if I could provide that resource, if the people on the other end don't have access, it's irrelevant, right? So how do we do telehealth? How do we do telemental health? So we, again, raised some funds, got some hotspots and some tablets, and went out and trained people how to do it, how to use it. So it included folks in palliative care and hospice and telemental health. And then we added another program with Zoom licenses and devices for recovery programs like AA and NA. So we help nonprofits, small businesses, college students, the unemployed. We really looked for who was suffering and how can we help keep everything afloat. So, and we had great help from local community volunteers as well. I think the added twist for us is that we also had a tornado come through on Easter. So right in the middle of our stay-at-home order, an entire swath of our community was destroyed. And so that added another level of energy to the work we were trying to manage. So I'm going to take a sip here. Sorry, I was losing my voice. Sometimes I hear people say that that can only happen in Chattanooga because you have municipal broadband. And I hear that. Certainly EPB is fabulous, and they were a major factor in helping us bring this together. But I don't think that having municipal broadband is sufficient. I think that's part of a solution, but there are other things that are very important that I've discovered in working here. And I think the number one factor in why we were able to get so much done was the collaboration, right? It didn't just happen. It was a history of organizations and people who worked together all the time, and it leveraged an existing trust that already happened, right? We had trust in each other already. And then, of course, the willingness to let other people have the spotlight, right? I think it was Harry Truman who said, it's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. And so that was definitely part of this effort, is that, you know, we don't care at the Enterprise Center who gets the credit at all. So it's really all about the people and their determination to solve the problem and their commitment to children that really made this happen. And it's also not that we weren't ever talking about this. Every year, showing up on that list as one of the least connected cities has been really a challenge for us, because we know we can do better than that. So, and the other thing I'd mention is that one of the struggles we had that I think a lot of communities are also facing is, how much money do you invest in a short-term solution if that investment reduces the amount available to invest in a long-term solution? So for me, that was part of the conversations we had and why we didn't put out, place more Wi-Fi hotspots. We really wanted to make sure we could afford the long-term solution. So the other thing I'd mention is, it's amazingly helpful to have your elected leaders. Here in Chattanooga, that's Mayor Burke, but we also have Hamilton County Mayor Coppinger. Coming from New England, our county system's not very strong, but here in the South it's very strong. So having those folks and an amazing superintendent, great local philanthropy, and our nonprofit all dedicated to this and willing to put in the time and the energy was part of why we could get a long-term solution. And we're not there yet. We still have a long way to go on that. So having the elected officials on board is my number one recommendation for where to start. So it's interesting to me because even if they can't invest, though personally I'd argue they ought to be prioritizing this, they have the power of convening, right? They can bring the right people together around the table. And so building a coalition of people who are dedicated to this might start with a convening that the mayor brings together, but it's got to include business, philanthropy, faith-based folks, nonprofits, elected officials, city council members, school leaders, and providers. And the thing that I always add there is impacted residents, right? We should be listening to the folks who are most significantly impacted by the challenge so we understand their needs better. I think the work that we did in identifying hotspots was really helpful. And I think it's something most communities can work on. We encouraged businesses, schools, colleges, and churches to all open their networks. And then we got a GIS map together with the help of our local university. That kind of thing is really helpful. I recognize the challenge you all have because it's cold in Minnesota. And didn't you just have a lot of snow? I'm from New England, but I live now in Chattanooga. I got to tell you, it's been 70 every day and I'm kind of enjoying it. But our challenge was in the summer because it would be over 100 degrees, right? So they're not perfect solutions. And for it, there are spots in the city where you could have driven during those days and seen 10 cars in a parking lot with the children online, right? Because they were using the church's hotspots. That is better than no option. When they closed the libraries, that became a real challenge here. But it is part of a puzzle, right? We're trying to find what are all the pieces. If you've got the capacity or the philanthropy that could help with purchasing 4G hotspots, I'd recommend you think about Mobile Citizen because of the unlimited cost and because they're unlimited. And I know that some libraries do lending for those hotspots. We gave them away. We just knew the problem was going to be too long-term for it to be a short-term, month at a time solution. There are some other really creative things that have happened around the country. I don't know if you've seen the Homegrown Mesh Network in Detroit. It's kind of an interesting project. What I really liked about it, it's not a perfect solution once again, but what I really liked about it was that they taught people how to build out the mesh network and so they could take care of it on their own. There are a couple like that around the country that are interesting. Again, not a perfect solution, but maybe part of a solution. I think the capacity to provide training and devices like we have at Tech Goes Home is helpful. And so all of the curricula is open and free. And so techgoeshome.org or techgoeshome.cha.org, all the modules are open and free, and many of them are relevant across the country. Some of them are specific to a region, but those are free. And there's no reason anybody has to do that work again. Just take what you want. And in fact, if you contact us, if you need it in other languages, we can help as well. So I know that Minnesota has a fairly large Somali population. And I have worked a lot with Somali folks because Boston also has a large Somali population. And so there are resources that can be used from Boston that may be helpful to that community. So I think the other piece on this that I have discovered, I love I can't remember, Gallardo, all the data that he shared, right? And what I love to say about that is the data wins the mind, the story wins the heart. To win the day, you got to have both, right? So you need to be able to quote the data, and you need to be able to talk about the stories. And that's how we're able to raise money, quite frankly, for all these projects, is we do both. I know the struggle of working with local large ISPs. But I always recommended, even when I was at Next Century Cities, that you bring them in and ask, what are you going to do? How are you going to help me? But being prepared to have them say they're going to take care of it next year. And then knowing that next year when you ask them, they'll say the same thing. And the year after that, they'll say the same thing. That's kind of important to know. We just haven't gotten the kind of response to that we hoped. And now a lot of them are trying to give up their copper networks. And so that's even going to be a bigger challenge. So as I mentioned, one of the other things I would say is think short-term and think long-term, but don't invest a lot in the short term if it prevents the long-term. I think of cities that have spent so much money that they now can't create another solution. So I think that's really an important factor. So finally, if you ever heard me speak before, you know what I'm going to say. And that is the number one factor is trust, right? So trust between the partners, trust between the organizations and the community. If tech goes home here in Chattanooga and many of the school teachers had not already built that significant level of trusts, we would have had a much harder time making this project happen. It's like the old joke, we're from the government and we're here to help, right? When people hear that we have a free resource for you, they think it sounds too good to be true and they're nervous. And so we needed to go into the neighborhoods and help folks understand through the Tech Goes Home program and through the teachers whom our families trusted that it's not too good to be true in this case. It's actually real. It sounds too good to be true, but it's actually what we're doing. So that's my presentation. I hope that was helpful.
Wow, thank you, Deb. God, that was terrific. Too good to be true. You know, the too good to be true part is the for 10 years or maybe longer. Wow. I mean, talk about a long-term solution. So I'm going to take the privilege of my moderator role and ask an initial question. And as I do that, I'm inviting everybody else to think about, we've got a few minutes now with Deb for question and answer and conversation, and said at the top how much Deb enjoys that. So please get your questions ready and feel free. You can either raise your hand or go ahead and drop them in the chat box as well. So Deb, what I wanted to ask you about was, I know here in Minnesota, and a bunch of us on the call are in different tables trying to figure out innovative solutions, just like you've described to us, and looking for promising practices and great examples of innovative approaches that both touch the near term and the long term, just as you described. We're scrambling, trying to find those examples. You shared a bunch of with us today, but are you aware of any conversations that are going on, or any place or any attempt to kind of bucket up examples of effective responses to the pandemic that you could point us to here in Minnesota?
I think NDIA, National Digital Inclusion Alliance, has done some of that. I think the challenge is that it's so related to your existing infrastructure.
Yeah.
So I would say one of the coolest projects I've ever seen is Marks and RS Fiber, right? Really thinking about short-term and long-term. You can't solve it all today, but we can get this far with the fiber and create a wireless solution for the last, and then go a little closer and a little closer, right? None of these solutions work without fiber. And so getting fiber as deep into the rural county as you can will help you have other alternative solutions in the future. But that is a long-term costly solution, right? It's worth it in the end, don't get me wrong, but it's going to cost some. I think the things that people could think about that definitely are going to be long-term, though, are things like making sure you got that dig once policy. I can't tell you how many communities I work with don't have one. So every time somebody digs up the road, every time somebody puts in any kind of landscaping or roadscaping, just you got to get conduit at least in there, right? And so the cost of building fiber is mostly placing the fiber, right? Either digging the holes or getting pole attachments, which quite honestly, the pole attachments are one of the most difficult things to navigate. And we did do a state-by-state review of what the pole attachment expectations were when I was at Next Century Cities, and you can find them on that site, but it was a little bit crazy.
Thanks for that, Deb. We do have a question here in the chat box I'm going to share with you from Becky Lowry. Becky has been a avid conference participant, and I was in a small group room with her earlier in the conference where we were taking that speed test that we're standing up here in Minnesota. And Becky has just a painful, slow speed. It's amazing she can even be on here with us today and trying to run her small business with it. And so here's Becky's question, Deb. She says, could you please explain a little further about what you meant when you talked about the big ISPs trying to give up their copper network? What does that mean? What's going on there? And what does it mean for rural Minnesota?
Well, so these copper networks, which have been, they're really old networks, and the copper is getting older by the minute, and they require a lot of repair. What they'd like to do is no longer run those networks or those DSL programs. And so some of them are trying to just give them up, which would put you in a really bad place, because then you wouldn't have an option. So yeah, I would watch what they're saying and check with your own provider, but I've seen some rumblings in a couple of articles lately about that happening. There's a small rural town in Massachusetts that had copper, and every time it rained, they couldn't call 911. So, that's a pretty serious issue. They didn't have cellular signal where they were, which I'm sure happens to some of your folks here too. But but the town got together and they built out a fiber network to the entire community because of that. I mean, it's a small rural town.
Wow.
And they backstopped it with taxes.
In the spirit of the hive mind, is anybody else with us this morning that would like to comment at all about the evolution away from copper networks, the legacy ISPs, and what that means for rural?
Well, AT&T just announced that they are backing away from their DSL service. And so if a house has DSL service now and then they sell that house to somebody else, AT&T will not hook that customer back up to DSL. And so that all across, I'm working in Illinois right now, all across Illinois, and we're just talking to Christopher from Wisconsin, where they're an AT&T state. All these states will be heavily impacted. And for many, many, many rural people, AT&T DSL is what they have. And it's also crazy. We just spent all this money on the CAF2 program, which AT&T took all the federal money, and now they're going to abandon that service. They should have to pay that back.
I agree, Bill. I agree. I think the issues with the FCC recently, I don't think they should be allowed to walk away from this either, quite frankly, because they've been taking money for so many years to support it, right? I find it frustrating. And what's going to happen is those folks won't be able to sell their houses.
Yeah.
At one point here, I don't know if Dana McKenzie is on the call today, but when she was in Cook County, Minnesota, before they had fiber, the county had threatened to condemn, at that point it was Quests, and seize their network for their failure, public safety issues. And so that might be another approach as a class action lawsuit to seize AT&T's network. And at least then you could run it out, make it work for a while you have a different plan.
And, the closer the fiber gets, the better the network runs. And so, getting it deeper and deeper into the territory that's covered by the copper would help while you're getting the next solution in place. So, there's a couple of folks out there doing some creative stuff with co-ops too. And they're saying they can make the finances work when there are 5 houses per mile. And so we need to be looking at those as well. And some of those folks did get CAF money this time around. So we're seeing some of that shift, but it's still not enough to really solve these problems.
Thanks, Deb. We've got a question here. You've mentioned the balance between short-term and long-term investments, hotspots versus fiber, as we try to pivot to respond to COVID. But what thoughts do you have about how you balance building better users' demand through hotspots by providing service that is good enough versus striving for genuinely good broadband?
Yeah, I've been hearing for years and years and years that nobody's ever going to use, more than 5 megabits per second, and then more than 10 megabits per second, or more than 25 megabits per second. I think we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, and I think the only solution is fiber. And I think that's something we need to help educate folks about. And when you think about, I'm in Chattanooga, so I have a gig symmetrical at home. Why? Because I can get it for $69, right? and it's amazing. So, and I, of course, could probably be okay with 100 megabits per second, even though I'm a power user, but I mean, it's a great opportunity. The goal has got to be that, first of all, the 25.3 that we are told is broadband speed by the FCC is not enough. I'd argue 100 symmetrical would be enough. I don't see how, if you've got 3 or 4 kids and you're working from home and they're doing video, I don't think those 4G hotspots are going to handle that well. So I don't think that's good enough. And so part of it is educating folks about, do we invest now for something that will get us by, or do we invest in a solution that will solve our problem tomorrow?
That is a very real, go ahead, David. Let's hear from you, and then I'll save my commentary. Go ahead, David.
We recently worked with Hiawatha Broadband for 29 connections to Dakota Electric substations in the county, a lot of them rural. One of them was by Prairie Island Nuclear Power Plant just outside of Red Wing. And part of that, then Hiawatha expanded and worked with us and did fiber to the home for the Indian community and the Prairie Island, all the businesses and all of the casinos. And we're working with them with expanding into other rural areas and throughout the county, and other connections into Red Wing, Cannon Falls, Northfield we've already got, and expanding into Scott County. So we've been working a lot with Scott County for point-to-point wireless 800 megahertz 5G. And they've been working with Rice County and LeSueur and Scott and Dakota working together for a temporary solution.
I think that's the same company, right, Mark, that RS Fiber?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And Dakota County's been over the years. I know you had me present with next community, with the once policy, where we've been, if West St. Paul, they're digging up the main Highway 3, Robert Street, we put in 4-inch conduit. And then South St. Paul, we're just put in 4-inch. Egan, we're getting ready to do a big traffic signal project that the Federal Transportation Department pays 80% of the cost to put in 12 strands of fiber between the traffic signals. And then the other 20%, 45 for the city of Egan, 55 with the county transportation. And then I'm with the IT department, and we'll walk in and put in multiple conduits and put in 288 or 144 strands of fiber between them, so that we overbuild and have options for the future.
That's really
Well, yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for that, David. And Perry's just shared out a solution for hard to reach rural areas. Perry, would you like to share that verbally with the group?
Sure. Our southern half of our county is rural, and we were struggling with a lot of things that Deb, you've mentioned here, and that we've heard multiple times is, these copper networks that are plagued by, and they are, limited on their bandwidth. And we were pursuing fiber and a partnership with lots of different providers. We had an open access model, but a lot of providers were not taking that middle mile. And with CARES, or with COVID, we had a real demand, like the rest of you, that we had to figure out a way to get rural broadband to people right away. And so on March 31st, our board approved a private-public partnership with a company called Netwave Broadband, and they deployed 5G and 900 megahertz on spots and towers that are backhauled over our fiber ring, our Scott County regional fiber network. And that solution has really been an excellent solution. Within 6 weeks, we were able to provide service option up to 3,600 homes. And with the CARES COVID funding, we're doing the same thing for the very, very hard to reach spots, and putting up small micro towers and deploying to 6 macro towers, all backhauled by fiber. Yeah. And I know several participants on this call have heard me say that before about this fixed wireless. I'm a huge fan of fiber. I will always be a big fan of fiber. My passion is getting broadband to people because of all the things that Deb, that you said, and we all know that it can do for people, from business to telemedicine to distance learning. I just think that fixed wireless is an excellent hybrid solution for a community while they continue to pursue the long-term strategy of fiber build-out, which can take obviously several years.
I 100% agree, right? It's a really good interim solution. People are going to get a decent speed. It does depend how many people are on the network, but it's still a decent solution that gets fiber a little closer, right?
You know, we heard from Deb about how important, I think you said your number one advice, Deb, was to get your elected officials on board, and the importance of that megaphone, that microphone, and that. And I'm wondering, you know, Perry and David, you guys have been so innovative and important in really finding those solutions. Was that true for you? Did it matter, your political leadership, your county and city officials, that they supported you? Could you reflect on that a little bit, the role of your leadership there to get that done?
Yeah, I can go first. It was absolutely critical. It's huge. Is getting getting our previous county administrator, our whole regional fiber network was his vision and his brainchild, Gary Shelton, and he deserves all the credit for it. I just happened to be the project manager, and then because I was the infrastructure manager, and then have since drank the Kool-Aid. So he helped them understand, but they were able to our leadership understands that it's not just an institutional network, that it's not just connectivity and circuits. It's a river to a community. It's the roads to a community. It's the whistle stop of the 21st century. It's anybody who doesn't understand broadband in that context. That's where you got to really get them to that, to understand that communities were built around rivers, and they were built around commerce, and they were built around communications, and broadband is that river to the world. And so if I saw, I'm actually down in Iowa Falls, Iowa, my wife's hometown, and it's a small community, beautiful town, and they're wrestling with different challenges that we have up in Scott County, where we've been one of the fastest growing counties for the past 20 years. Communities, this is the fastest way for them to build their community, is to get broadband. So the leadership of it's critical. You can't go anywhere. They're the ones that hold the purse strings. So your elected officials, you got to continue to work with them to understand that in that context.
Wow, Perry, you waxed so eloquently this morning, talking about internet as the river of the town. I love that metaphor. Deb, sorry, go ahead.
It's a coffee.
They also have to manage permitting, right? So you really want them on board, and you want them to have that dig once policy, and that's got to come from your leadership. And you know, I think that today, you know, the pandemic has exacerbated this. Certainly, leaders are hearing from folks, we need better internet. And so providing them a solution that you can collaborate on is going to be seen more positively today than it might have been in the past.
Yes, David, go ahead.
Dakota County recently formed a Dakota Broadband Board, which has the mayors and couple county commissioners in it, so that we have the leadership all working together countywide, and using some of our assets, we're trying to transfer the ownership to this new joint powers group. A lot of what we've done in the past was unite the islands of fiber. So a school district would build, we would work with them and put in fiber. And then in some cases like this last year, I'm pulling out fiber because there's new traffic signals, new areas are built up. Working with like Farmington Schools, pulled out their 12 strands of fiber out of their existing conduit and put in 144, gave them back 24 for their, and picked up their maintenance cost. So we're able to unite all these islands that used to be separate and used to have separate connections, and use the operating dollars that we've gathered together. The county had 40 some plus T1s that we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for a year. And we've used that by teaming up with the cities and the schools and the state and the community colleges and the University of Minnesota and the electric companies. By merging everything together, we can bring the cost way down and have extra strands of fiber with redundant rings. So I'm getting ready to look at where I can possibly work with Perry so that I put in some feelers out there. We just, Lakeville, it was announced this last week that Amazon is going to build a 750,000 square foot fulfillment center to do shipping for barbecue grills and mattresses and larger items. And I've got a Highway 70 project in Lakeville, the 2-lane highway that's going into 4-lane, and we've been building fiber along there with 288 strands of fiber. So I'll have fiber at the curb that then will tie in municipal liquor store down the road underneath the 35 that then goes over to Scott County's fiber. And then I can work with Perry to possibly hook up to Amazon, one in Shakopee and one in Lakeville, and provide dark fiber between them that they can use whatever bandwidth that they want, besides work with multiple providers to bring them other connections for high speed.
You know, it's interesting. So, you know, I have the good fortune here of dealing with 2 mayors. And I remember, Mark, you had a whole bunch of them, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about how you managed to get them all on the same page?
No, yeah, what you just kind of told the truth. Once they understood the opportunity, then they all just got on board. It's like you said, you have to have trust in what you're saying, and they have to trust you back, and we got that. But I would like you to speak for a minute on what some people consider the drag of the FCC in the last 4 years, and what you might see as a potential change in the wind coming, and what a change in leadership at the FCC can mean for this broadband talk.
Well,
But
you know,
be careful.
I have been critical of the FCC, which is no surprise to Mark, maybe others. But I think, you know, when I look at the current circumstance, and we have children without home access who are learning from home, and there is no effort to utilize some of the E-rate dollars to provide home access, I get frustrated, right? It's an important home resource. If that child's learning from home, they should have every resource they need there, right? And we currently have children that don't. And so I would love to see them do that. I think there are other things the FCC could do as well. I think the issue of net neutrality has definitely, they've sort of given up a whole bunch of their capacity to respond to some of the issues that are coming up, like AT&T walking away from their copper. I think the other piece of that, really, when you think about the ways in which they have tried to deregulate, I'm okay with deregulation, but you can't give up any kind of response to it. When folks like AT&T walk away, when these great big mergers are happening, right? So that are removing some of the options for low-income families, I get frustrated by all of it. And I would love to see a change. I'd love to see more effort on the E-rate dollars. I'd love to see a totally different way of dispersing CAF funds. I'd love to see a map that actually works. You know, there is not a single map out there that's actually legitimate, and yet we continue to work off those maps. So yeah, I'm going to calm down before I say anything I'll be sorry for saying, but I am really frustrated when I hear the FCC claim victory, or that they've made progress in supporting rural communities with broadband, when in fact the data they're using to say that, to make that claim, is not valid. So yeah, it's frustrating. We need better systems in place. And I know that these are challenging times, and I know getting a good map is a challenge, but we got to figure it out, because we can't be preventing local communities from getting access to those dollars because the map is wrong.
Thank you.
Probably more
Thank
than you.
No, not at all. Thank you for that, Deb. And I do want to, on behalf of all of us in here in Minnesota, again, thank you so much for your remarks and for joining us, and for the inspiration you provided, for all that work you're doing in Chattanooga. It was really a privilege to have you with us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you all for inviting me and being so patient as we spent a lot of time talking about this issue.
Great. So this is the time of the kind of that awkward like Zoom thing, you know, so when we normally all would push back our chairs and get up and go refill our coffee cups and go to the bathroom or something, maybe walk around. So Mary, I'm going to call an audible here and invite us to all take like a 5-minute break and get up, and then we'll reconvene. I'm just keep the Zoom link open, but we'll reconvene the group, and we're going to have a little quick intro into open space and talk about Harrison Owen and how that came to be, and a little bit about how we're going to proceed to identify some topics for the rest of our conversation this morning. So let's take a 5-minute break. I'll see you back here at